Welcome back to the Bryan Devore Connection. I'm your host, Bryan Devore. Marital planning, both before the marriage and after the marriage. Very important topics to talk about. So here today is a friend who we were talking, I've known her for now over 8 years, and she's been here before, Amanda Singer. Thank you very much, Amanda, for coming and talking about these important subjects.
Thank you for having me. I love being able to share more about them.
Absolutely. So you and I met, we talked about the different offices you've been in about 8-9 years ago, and you are what's called a divorce mediator, but other stuff as well. So talk about your background and how you got into this field.
Yeah, absolutely. So I first really learned about mediation when I was in undergrad and was like, oh, wow, this is something that's an option and I didn't know about. And so I went to law school. I am a licensed attorney, but never wanted to litigate. And I think that for especially family law, that mediation provides a much better opportunity for people to go through the divorce process instead of both hiring attorneys and going through court. And so I've been mediating now, 12, 13 years. And I also have my CDFA, which is a certified divorce financial analyst. And so between my law degree and between the financial expertise and having a master's in dispute resolution, I really focus on mediation and being able to help people. A lot of it's divorce mediation, but as we're going to talk about, there's also marital, premarital mediation, parenting, everything that really kind of encompasses families.
Yeah, disagreements and problem resolution.
Yeah.
So, you and I met right when I was going through my own divorce. And, before I went through a divorce, I heard of divorce attorneys, certainly didn't know about mediators, and definitely not certified divorce financial analysts. People don't know about these things.
Yeah.
But they can be very important when you're talking about your family, having healthy family dynamics afterwards if there are children involved. So the differences between mediation and using attorneys, how would you describe that?
Yeah, so mediation is the process where you've got a neutral third party. So when I work as a mediator, I'm a neutral third party, not representing either of the spouses in a divorce mediation, but there to work with both of them, to help them facilitate the communication between themselves, to come up with options, to problem solve, and to help them through the whole divorce process so that they can reach agreements outside of court. And then we submit everything to the court. So they still have a court order that's enforceable and, it's the same end result, but those clients never have to go into court. On the flip side of it, if both people hire attorneys, which is I think what more people think they have to do, just like you're saying that not everybody knows about the options, people think, oh gosh, I'm going through a divorce, I need to hire a divorce attorney. And, one person hires an attorney, so then the other person has to hire an attorney, and then they end up fighting. And a lot of times they're not talking anymore. It's only the attorneys are talking, and it can take a very long time. It gets very expensive because you're paying for two professionals to go back and forth. And most of the time, the end result isn't something either party is happy with. And so our goal in mediation is the opposite, right? We really want both of them to walk away feeling good about things. One of our core values is the idea that, it's a positive transformation, that they leave even better than they came in.
Right. And, when I went through my process, we used a mediator, and definitely a healthier way looking forward.
Yeah.
I'm going to be co-parenting with this person for the rest of my children's lives or my life. And I don't want to have a contentious, situation. So bringing in a mediator, I think, really helps with that. The certified divorce financial analyst, that was a whole other world they didn't know about. Yeah. What do they do?
Yeah, so CDFAs are wonderful. Myself, I did that because I think it's important as a mediator to understand the financial issues. But somebody who works as like an individual CDFA, they could be a neutral CDFA who might work with both of the parties, or you could have a CDFA that's just going to work with one person. And where they're really helpful is from a financial perspective, understanding what is your post-divorce budget going to look like? How much, if you're talking about support, how much support might you need? What is the finances going to look like? And then understanding how you're dividing up your assets and debts, and not just what that means today, but what does that mean going forward? Things like retirement accounts are going to be different from like a home. Are you keeping your home? Are you not? Understanding really the financial implications. And, some of them are also like a financial planner or advisor, but it's different because it's really about like during the divorce, and then kind of going forward, what does it look like? Most of them won't keep you on as like a long-term client. Some might, but it's more about getting you set up financially to understand it. And for a lot of people, they may have not dealt with the finances during the marriage, because when you're married, you're not both going to do the same things. You've divided up responsibilities. And so they might need a little bit of extra help figuring out, what does my financial future look like?
Right. So really they come in and triage the situation in a moment in time to set people up for success. Speaking of success and maybe failures, what are some of the mistakes that you see people make when they're going through the divorce process?
Absolutely. So like we're talking about, I think sometimes one of those is that they don't get the right professionals that they need. And does everybody need all of the same professionals? No, but it depends on the situation. But it is knowing that, okay, you could hire a mediator and making sure that your mediator is qualified to mediate and do what you're looking for. But also maybe you do, like we're saying, need a CDFA, have a consulting attorney. Just because you're in mediation doesn't mean that you have to forget about the fact that you need legal advice. And so having that. So I think it's really knowing what professionals that you need to work with through the process. And, we are always making referrals, right? Figuring out what they need and making sure they have the right professionals. But I think far too often people don't think about who they need to work with while they go through the divorce. And sometimes they worry from a cost perspective what it might look like. But I think honestly, you end up in a position where it might cost you more if you don't work with the right professionals.
Right. You want to set yourself up for success, because this is hopefully the only time you have to do this, and you want to do it right, because the decisions you make now affect your life in the near future and going forward.
Absolutely.
Speaking of setting yourself up for success, you also, as we talked about, help people who are going into a marriage.
Yes.
And we talked about the fact that my son's getting married soon, and he and I and his fiance, who works for me, we talked about doing some planning ahead of time, having the conversations that maybe you're having them now, but maybe in a different way. So talk about the importance of doing sort of that premarital setup.
Yeah, absolutely. So, premarital mediation or kind of some premarital planning, it's really having the hard conversations that people aren't thinking about. Because when you're getting married, you're happy, right? Everything's great. Why would you think, oh, I want to go to a mediator, right? And what's important is that you have the conversations and understand, okay, what are you each coming into the marriage with? Sometimes at an age when you're getting married, you might not have much or anything, but other times you're going to have a lot more. And it's also different if it's a second or a third marriage versus a first marriage.
Sure.
So it's having those conversations, understanding, what are your expectations? What do you expect things to look like while you're married, and make sure that those align. And if they don't, that you're figuring out how do you get to alignment on those. One of the things that I think people don't realize is if you don't have a premarital agreement, or a prenup, as we often hear them called, you have one. You have the state law of California, which says, okay, we're a community property state, and so anything during a marriage is community property. And I think a lot of times, not only are people not discussing their expectations for their marriage, they don't really know what that means to be a community property state. And they want to do one thing. They say, well, we kept our accounts separate the whole time.
Right.
And they don't realize what that actually means. And so oftentimes it's having a conversation. It may not even result in them deciding they want a prenup, because maybe they're okay with the way that the law is and they're happy to have everything be community. But it's making sure that they know that. And I think that it's just that information isn't out there. You're not required to do much before, if anything, before you get married.
Right.
People always say to me, it was very easy to get married and it's far harder to get divorced.
Right.
So having some conversations before are just so important. And then maybe you do decide, we do want to put together a prenup. And then doing that through mediation is a much better process, because as the mediator, I can sit down with both of them, have those conversations and discuss it. Much different from, one person saying, I want a prenup, or their family saying you need a prenup, and they go hire an attorney. And then it's not a collaborative conversation. And so we think it's really important to do that together. And then there's some requirements that we make sure are handled, like having their own attorneys and stuff. But doing it through mediation is just a much better process for both of them. And especially if one person might be hesitant, because a lot of times they're not both on board for that.
Right. Yeah, because usually you and I've heard this before, people go into it and one person says they want a prenup and they say, wait, you don't trust me, or,
Yes.
those emotions come up. But doing it in sort of that collaborative mediation process, I would think would be much easier and set them up for success.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I had someone I worked with who came in, and I was actually, as an attorney, I could work with one person, and I was working with him. But before we started, I said, hey, I think you really should do this through mediation. I think it would be better. She wasn't 100% on board, all of that. And he's like, no, I'll just have you work with me. And then it ended up being that there were a lot of issues. And so then I found them another mediator they could work with, because I couldn't do that at that point. But, if they had started it from the beginning, I think it would have been a much smoother process before they got married.
Right. Well, people who are watching this are going to benefit, I think, from this, because you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
And when people know what it's like, what it means to get married, but they don't know everything that really should go into it, and then also with divorce. So Amanda's information is on screen. You can give her a call. You can visit their website and learn more about the services they provide. Amanda, thank you so much for coming in and sharing the importance of planning both before marriage and after marriage.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brian.
You got it.